Welcome back. I'm here today. I've got some rings carved. I would like to get them sprued today, but the first thing I need to do is talk to you about extra cleanup. In the last video, I talked about how I don't really like using sandpaper because the sandpaper can get embedded in the wax and then not burn out and leave pits. So one of the ways for finishing your waxes is by heating it with the alcohol lamp. And so I've got my alcohol lamp, I've got the denatured in it. I'm gonna turn it on its side, I'm gonna light it. And then one of the things I just wanna show you is that you can actually take your wax, literally take your wax and just run it through the flame. And you'll see that it's starting to polish it. So this is called flame polishing. The problem for me with flame polishing is I like really hard edges. And so as I use that, can you see that it is rounding my edges? And if that's an aesthetic that you like, you can go ahead and play with that. But I can see a little bit of buildup on this edge that's changing the shape of it, and you see how easy my split ring is. But this is what's called flame polishing. And with organic pieces it works really well, but can you see that it's changed the perception of this hard edge to a rolled soft edge that's on there. Another thing that you can do for cleanup, don't forget to use the disclosure wax. Rub it on the surface, wipe it off, and then it's gonna show you where I have my nooks and crannies that need to get cleaned up. This is that one that I was showing you of additive wax on it, and so I haven't really worked hard to clean it up, but I have worked pretty hard on the sides to clean it up. But the disclosure wax still can show you the surface on that, so the edges aren't bad. But if I go ahead and I heat this with the alcohol lamp and I flame polish it, I'm going to lose this sharp edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this down with my files to a number 2 file. And then at that point, what I like to do is I like to take this is hardware cloth. It's for window screen. And I like to take it, and even by itself, you can rub it on the surface. And it kind of works like a Surform, which is what woodworkers use. But what I find, if you've got really deep marks, that's not going to take it out. So what I like to use is a little bit of turpentine, and the turpentine actually melts the wax, and then the screen comes across and kind of levels it out. I had a student that was from Eastern Europe, and he used his wool sweater to polish his waxes. So this is a piece of wool that somebody gave me, and it too, he just would rub it on his sweater and clean up his waxes for that. And so that is another technique that I've learned from somebody else. I still really like using the turpentine. So I'm gonna pull the flame back away so I don't got the turpentine with this. And I'm just gonna take the turpentine, put my thumb over the top with the screen, get it a little wet, and then I'm gonna rub across the surface and start the cleanup process here. And you can see that it gets it wet, and then as I'm using it, the screen on it, it's going to help smooth things out. As I wipe it down, you can see that I've still got some marks here, so it might be best that I just go back in with my file. But on the sides here, I think this is going to clean it up pretty doggone good. And the more time you take cleaning up your waxes, the less time you have to remove metal on the other end. And so it's worth your while, and most everybody gets in a hurry. They cast their piece anyway, and then they spend a lot more time cleaning up. And when you're working with non-precious materials, can you see how that's cleaning that? And actually taking off some of, so a really deep scratch like on the top isn't going to come off, but this is cleaning up pretty good. and it's my way of not losing my nice clean sharp edges. I'm gonna go back in with the file to clean up the top there. Okay, so this is a pretty just form ring here. When you've got things that have hills and valleys and crevices and stuff, what you want to use is, I like to use a toothbrush. So I've got this ring here that's carved down pretty much right out of that carving book, with a little variation of my idea on it. I just really love how these just drop off here, and I'm not sure it needs anything more. But after I cast it, I could think about setting stones in there. I could also run a gold wire through there. There are lots of other things I can do to it. But to try to get in with this screen, it's not going to get down in there. So I like to take a toothbrush, and even before I put any turpentine on it, you can see that just coming in with my toothbrush, it's getting down in the hills and valleys, and it's cleaning off a lot of the white kind of flaky stuff that comes from the carving process. I can then do the same thing here and get a little bit of turpentine on my paintbrush without dumping it all over the floor. And now I can come back in and do this, and it's going to help smooth out the wax. And it dries pretty quickly. And then I can come down the sides. And then at that point, if I want to do the clean area or the smooth area, I can use the screen again. It's on there. I've also been told that lighter fluid works even better than turpentine. I just kind of don't want to bring another thing into the classroom. But I think you can see that these edges are cleaning up pretty well, and the top is going to dry and look pretty good. So this is always when you find something that you didn't notice was in your wax. Like I've got a little problem right there on the top, and it might be a situation where I want to go back in with a file and true up that edge a little bit better with it. And there's my towel. So I'm going to dry this off. And I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to say that it looks a lot better than it did. I can see I've got kind of a little nick right there. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and sprue this up and cast it, and then you're going to see I've got a lot of cleanup I'll need to do on it afterwards. So if this were my project and I didn't want to have to do a lot of cleanup on the other end, and I didn't need to film this today, I would probably go back in and work this. It reminds me a little bit of like when you first get your first fabricated piece and you take it to the polishing machine, and after you use Triple E, it's like a magnifying glass is showing you all the imperfections. So does this process of cleaning up your waxes. I'm going to run with this the way that it is. I'll probably grumble at myself after I get it cast for the cleanup on it. And then once again, I want to remind you guys about casting rings, that the size that you want, I always cast the ring to the size that I want, because there's some shrinkage that happens. But usually I have to go back in and do a little bit of sanding and polishing on the inside of the ring, and that usually brings it back up to the right size. So that's about how I'm going about doing it. I also have this piece that I took a burr, flat bottomed, and I went in and I tried to do something more like engine lathe turning, which is something a lot of the woodworkers are doing nowadays. I think that this is going to show up a lot more interesting in metal, but can you see kind of the white flecks that are down in there? I'm going to take my toothbrush again and just go in just lightly, because I don't want to lose the pattern, and pull that away. And I think I'm going to have some really nice reflections happening on this when I cast it. Okay. So when it comes to spruing, I would really like to work with you guys the first time. Bring me up your wax ring, and we'll sit and we'll figure out how to sprue it so that it's going to cast properly and with no problems. And so there are three things that I like to talk about when you're thinking about spruing. So I always say three things to think about. The first thing you want to think about is the most direct way for the metal to go in. And sometimes one overcompensates for the other. But the most direct way would be going in. I probably would not sprue this right here because it would have to go up and turn this way, and then it would have to come all the way back down around. So the metal would have to go in and then come back down on itself. And this would all fill in, but I don't think this whole top edge would fill in, because when the metal, you've got your base, you've got your sprue, and you've got your ring, metal goes in, it'll take a right and a left that way. What it can't do is come back on itself, okay? So that's what I mean by coming up with the most direct way. So that's number one, direct flow is what I call it. And then number two is, where is it the most massive, and is that the best place? So the thickest area. And this oftentimes gets trumped, no pun intended, to the flow of it or the design pattern that's on there. So with this ring here, the thickest area is up top, but I don't necessarily want to put a sprue here because then I'd have to cut and recarve this all in metal. But what I could consider doing is coming in and spruing it here, and then the metal would travel this way, and it would travel that way, and then it would travel up like that and to the top there, okay? I could probably get away with just spruing it on the bottom, but I think I'm gonna sprue it on the side where it's thicker, because you want to think about the metal going in, and the farther it has to go, the more it's gonna cool down, and you'll get what are called cold shorts. So always, if you can find a way that's the thickest. If this is just going to be a beautiful mirrored finish on top here, I could just sprue this right from the top. It's the most massive, goes in, comes around, it gets thinner. As I'm talking about the spruing, I need to remind you that I'm thinking about working with bronze and silver. When I've worked with gold, I've had a tendency to add more sprues because gold's heavier and it doesn't travel as far. And the melting temperature is also higher, so that means that it can cool down faster and you'll get cold shorts. So if this were a gold ring, what I probably would do is sprue it right here. Here's my base, my button. And then I would, here's my ring. I probably would run then another sprue right straight through the top, so that this would come in and go that way, and then that way, and they'd all meet at the top. And I would make sure that this thicker top of the ring actually fills completely, okay? I think in silver, I would just turn it around and sprue it right off the top, unless I had a really beautiful intricate carving here, or if I had done a lot of beautiful additive wax on there, then I might consider coming at it from the side, or doing it like gold right up through the middle. So it's taken me a long time to get good at figuring out where to sprue things, so I really want you guys to make sure that when you get your piece, that you bring it to me and we'll take a piece of paper and I'll draw what you need. The third thing that's really important is, where is it for the easiest cleanup? So a lot of times you'll have a band ring that has a pattern that goes all the way around, and you don't want to put a sprue anywhere where that pattern is, because you'd have to recarve it after you cut the sprue off. And all of you guys are probably experiencing that right now with your cuttlebone casting. So the way of the easiest is finding a way where I would not put my sprue in the center of this, because I would lose all that beautiful pattern. But I can certainly come in and I'll probably put it here versus here, because here it's got to go sideways a little bit more. Here I'm sending it up, and with the centrifugal casting, all the energy is going to go in that direction. It might be a little bit harder for me to clean off that round, but I think I have a better chance of getting a complete casting if I do it like this. Okay. So I've done rings where the shank, this has a beautiful pattern all the way around, and so I don't want to sprue it. So what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll sprue a Y like this, and the Y comes in and attaches on the inside of the band where it's clean. And then after I've cast it, I'll actually cut off from the inside the sprue, and then this is all left intact so that it's your carving really to stand out there. Can you think of anything else? Questions for me, Aaron? I love having Aaron here because he'll catch me on things that I haven't covered.
I don't think
so. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is I want to think about spruing on my pieces, and then I've got to think about putting it in a flask. So I want to introduce you to this. This is a steel flask. This is the rubber base, and the rubber base has a little piece of wax on the inside there, and that's where we're going to attach our sprues, and this becomes the button. Okay, so we have some in the studio that are flat like this, and I don't really like using these because think about the metal going in and hitting a flat surface. It's going to cool down before it does that. These were actually originally designed to have just around the edge, and this wax has been added in there. So when you go to get your flask, the first thing you want to do is get one that's got a round button on it. And then do you notice the difference in cleanliness? This has a lot of old investment that's in it, and that old investment doesn't mix with the new investment, and it can cause problems on the surface of your pieces. So what I did is I grabbed this piece, I went over, I washed it, I cleaned it with the brush. I also did the same thing on the inside of this flask. You can see this one was just used and put away. I would clean all of this old plaster off of it before I used it. So I went and I picked out what I think is going to be a good rubber base and sprue for this. And what I had to think about is if I'm spruing rings, they can almost touch the edge of the flask. I like to stay about a 1/16 of an inch away, and then you can sprue them up so that they're really close to each other too. When I worked in industry, I used to make these little Boeing AWACS tie tacks, and I could put maybe 100 of them in a large flask on a tree. I'm going to show you today just how to probably sprue 2 and cast. If you're thinking about putting things in one flask, you don't want a really thin, delicate piece in the same flask with a really thick piece, because when you're heating the metal, the thicker piece is going to need to have a little bit more heat, and the thinner piece is not, and you're not going to get as good a casting. So I always separate out when I have a bunch of pieces to cast. I always go, these are the chunky ones, these are the medium, and these are the fine ones. And I'll help you when you figure that out. I think today I want to sprue these 2 up. And so what I had to think about, and the PowerPoint that I showed you guys that's in the canvas kind of helps with this. But when you sprue your pieces, they can be pretty close to each other. So something like that. What you want to do is you want to sprue them on the top part of the button. And so I always tell people that when you sprue up things, think of the way that like a lilac bush grows. Everything kind of comes out of the center, and the bigger pieces, taller pieces, are in the center, and the smaller, more delicate are on the side. Unlike like a weeping willow that comes up and does this, you're not gonna get these castings in here. So I like to keep the majority of my sprues on the top of the button, because otherwise I have to have a lot more metal. If I've got a sprue down here, I've got to then fill this whole thing full of metal before it's going to go into this little doodad on the side. So I like to try to put everything, I put the biggest pieces in the middle, and I go to the thinner and thinner around the side that are there. I've just got 2 today to do, so I think I'll just put them kind of right next to each other towards the top. I do want to mention something. This doesn't have any texture or importance on the back. I can just sand this off and polish it. So when I sprue this, if I sprue it just straight up and down, while I'm vacuuming, the air bubbles are going to travel up and past it, right? But if I tilt it so that the part that is smooth is at an angle, so if I sprue it up and I tilt it like this, my texture's on this side. When it comes up, if any air bubbles get trapped, they're going to get trapped on the smooth side. They're not going to get trapped in my design that I'm really wanting to have clarification with. Same thing with this ring. By putting it on the side here, I'm risking getting some bubbles trapped in all those little channels there. So I'm going to just do a direct shot straight up through the center, like I would if I were doing gold. So we have those 3 things to think about: the direct flow of the metal, the thickness, you want your sprue going into the thickness if you can, and you need the easiest cleanup, and sometimes you have to compromise one of those for the other with your design. And I think that takes experience, and I would like you guys to make sure that you check in with me when we do that. Okay, the other thing I want to say is that you can put almost all of your pieces very, very close to the edge of the side of the flask, but you need a full 1/2 inch on the top here, because we're going to be shooting the metal in. The metal's going to go in, and if you don't have enough investment on top, it's going to blow right out the top. So really make sure, when I did this, I'm going to sprue this on here, and I'm going to check and make sure that I still have that extra up top so that I don't blow out the top end. The flask around here is going to hold it structurally. You have nothing holding it on this end. It'll just blow out the back. Okay? So I'm going to sprue these up, and what I want to do first is I want to talk about sprue wax. So the sprue wax comes in some different sizes. I think I can get away with this sprue because can you see that it's about the same width as my link? If this were much, much wider, I would want to maybe thicken up my sprue, and one of the ways you can do that, it's kind of a pain, but you can actually put 3 of them together. My favorite wax working tool is my fingernails, and I can melt this into a round that I can then put on a much thicker piece. But I think I can get away with just spruing this, and I think I'm going to sprue it right there. Okay. And then when I'm thinking about this ring, this is about the same width. It's a little wider than this side, but I'm also going to run a sprue right up through the center there. So I'm going to take my trusty fingernail. I'm going to break that off. I'm going to stick this piece inside if I can. And just because it's fitting in there nice and tight doesn't mean that I can just say that's done. I'm going to have to melt the green wax to the pink wax to have it stick together. And then I'm going to put this sprue here. Okay. So everybody kind of has a different way of doing spruing. I'm going to do this by heating up my tool. And then the thing that's really important, here's my sprue, here's my casting. I need to heat up this paddle. I need to stick it in between the two. I need to touch the two, and I need to pull the paddle out. That's going to melt these two together. If you don't do that and you just touch around the edge, there's a really good chance it's going to break off. And what happens is your wax floats to the top of the investment. You pull it out, you dump the investment, and we mix up a new batch. sometimes you don't see it come to the top, and then it just gets lost in the investment, and you're going to have to remake it. So spruing is really important. I could set this up on this edge here. What I need is something stable, and I'm going to heat my tool. This tool's a little big. I think I'm going to use this one. And I don't have any wax on it, but I can see it starting to get a little shiny. And now I'm going to come over. I'm going to try to line it up so Aaron can see this. Getting it hot. I'm going to come in and I'm just going to touch down on both of them. The mistake people make is they move it too soon and you break the seal on it. The other thing that people do is they're too afraid to damage the blue wax, so they don't touch and get it hot, and that can be problematic. So what you can see here now is that I've got a lot of the pink wax running down. This is where I come in with my fingernail or a carving tool, but in industry I got in the habit of doing this. And I'm just going to clean off the extra blob so that I don't have to grind it off after I cast. And what I'm looking for is something that looks like a funnel. So one of the things that you can do after you get your piece on there is you can heat it a little bit, and then you can just go in and touch just lightly around the edge. And that makes, in the PowerPoint it shows, it's called a fillet. So we're making that so it's just a nice transition down into there. And then another way, can you see that? Yeah, another way. I only need this sprue to be long enough for me to get in with a jeweler's saw and cut it off. And the longer the sprue, the less likely it's going to, the metal's going to get there. So you can see that I used the hot tool. I cut it. I'm going to clean up a little bit again with my fingernail around the edge here. I notice I've got a little tiny chip right on this casting, or on my wax, and so I'm actually going to fill that in with a little bit of pink wax and make it so I don't have to, there we go. So I just kind of filled in, for some reason I had a little divot there. And now I've cleaned that up. So it's feeling like it's gonna work for me. And now I need to do the ring. I'm gonna come in, and yeah, this is fitting in here really nice and tight and everything, but I need to melt the two together. So I'm actually touching down all around the edge, and the wax has a tendency to flare out, melt and flare. But make sure that you're also melting the green wax. And the carving waxes melt at a much higher temperature than the sprue waxes do. So you do need to heat them a little bit, but you don't have to worry about risking damaging your ring. But I'm definitely heating that. And making sure that I've got a nice flare around the bottom of it. And I'm going to draw and show you why I think that's so important. So say I have you're going to hear me say over and over and over again about undercuts. So here's my flask. I've sprued my ring on here. I've got a nice little flare here coming out, right? But what can happen down here is you can have an undercut. So I'm going to enlarge that. And what is an undercut is this. And then this goes up like this. Here's your ring, right? This is an undercut here. If that gets left there, this all gets filled in with investment. And so when the metal goes in, the opening's smaller. Metal's not going to want to go in, but this will break off just like a cornice. If you're out skiing, you have to worry about that. And then this is going to break off and it's going to travel in, and it always ends up at the top with little triangular pits in your casting. So make sure that you have no undercuts in the spruing system. So nice fluid, make it come up, make sure that it's not gonna grab onto any of the investment and take it in. That said, you might have some undercuts up here, but by the time the metal gets up there, it's not gonna be as powerful as it is down here blowing in. And so you're probably still gonna have a good casting anyway. Okay, so now I need to put the other piece on. And then we have to do something that everybody always forgets, as we need to weigh these waxes. So I think as soon as I get this other wax sprue on, I think what we'll do is we'll stop the film, we'll go over to the camera, or go over to the gram scale and weigh our waxes. So that's stuck on, it's not perfectly straight, but that's okay. But I need to go back in with my hot tool and touch down around the edge, making sure that I've got a nice flow. And sometimes I'll add a little bit more wax on if I feel that it's necessary. Remember, when you're heating the wax, if you heat it not in the flame, it does a better job. That's a lot of wax. I'm gonna let some of that come off. There you go. And now I feel pretty confident, even though this isn't perfectly in line. I think it's gonna be fine. That's kind of how life is for me right now, crooked. So, okay, so these are the ones that I have that I want to invest. So to be able to know the exact weight of the metal that we're going to need to cast, we need to weigh it. This is much, much more important than when you're pouring an ingot or when you're pouring a cuttlebone, because we're directly pouring that, and we can stop when it fills up. But in the casting machine, once you let the machine go, it's going to spin, and all the metal's going to go in, and if there's too much of it, it's going to splatter around the casting machine. So we need to be really accurate with this. What happens is everybody gets excited, they put these on here, and then they go, oh, I forgot to weigh them. So let's stop, let's go over and meet where I got the gram scale. We'll weigh these and we'll calculate my metal. I'm going to cast these in silver, and I'll talk to you guys about that.